The reason they like reading my stuff is that I've always got real life examples to prove what I'm saying.
There's a lot of good people that listen to this podcast.
Other than God and my family, deer hunting would be next in line on my list of priorities.
From the bottom of our hearts, it's just fantastic and awesome to have the support that you guys are getting.
People ask me about expandable broadheads and love swings.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast with Don Higgins. I'm Terry Peer, brought to you by Osseo Gear. Don, October 31st, we did not do a Halloween trick-or-treat costume party celebration for the podcast because you're just wearing your normal t-shirt and ball cap. Where's your costume at?
When you look as bad as I do, Terry, you don't need a costume. You scare people just naturally.
Especially little kids that come to the door. Is that it? Well, we want to talk a little bit about, we're kind of in an awkward situation right now between the both of us where we're looking forward to the rut. We have some concerns about the weather. I think most hunters, if they're not on a specific buck right now, I think it's a great conversation for people to relate to us right now. But, we're October 30th. We've probably started to see a little bit of cruising, a little bit of, a lot of scrape activity. These bucks are on a fever pitch, if you will, trying to be ready for the first doe that comes in. Let's talk a little bit about what we see in the forecast with the weather. I don't know about you, but it's rained in Kentucky all day today. But tomorrow sets in about temperatures in the high 60s. And I forget where the lows are, maybe in the low 50s, high 40s. But it looks like we're going to ride this weather pattern for at least a week and a half. So let's talk a little bit about preparing for the rut and what's going on.
Yeah, we just had an awesome week. Man, the woods were as beautiful as I've ever seen them this past week, and I enjoyed some good hunts. I didn't see any shooter bucks or anything, seen plenty of deer. I checked a lot of trail cameras this week. The scrape activity is out of this world. I've seen scrapes everywhere and had cameras on scrapes that were just loaded with buck pictures. But that's all set to change, after this front that's coming through now. Like you said, it's going to really warm up. So, the rut's still going to go on the same time every year, no matter what the weather is. It's just that what we see as hunters really can vary based on the weather. And with this hot weather, my best advice is going to be, be there early and late every day. I don't think that the activity in the morning is going to continue on very late. I'm guessing by 9 o'clock at the latest, it's going to be pretty much wrapped up for the morning. And then in the afternoon, without a doubt, that last hour is going to be the time to be there. So all day sits, not hurting anything to do it, but I'm going to say that your odds of catching a good shooter buck up on his feet in midday are probably less than they would be if the temperatures were a little bit below normal. But boy, that first and last hour of the day is when you really need to be there.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit more because, I've never claimed to know everything. I have, sometimes creatures of habit are your worst enemy. But, I've never, unless it's a spot that is just really hard to get in and out of that I'm worried about busting deer, I very rarely make the decision to go in and set all day. From the beginning, I go in prepared to, if the action's going, I'm obviously not going to get down unless there's a code brown or something like that. But, during the rut, I pack every day to be prepared for especially when we go to Illinois, to be prepared to stay in all day. But I guess I might be doing this or thinking about it wrong. Unless it's a spot that I know I think I have 2 spots up in Illinois, and I'm not going to say where they're at because of some people that are listening, but the spots. It's just really hard to get down into it, and I don't want to walk in and out 4 times. where I would go in and sit all day. And all day sit, you're not saying that there wouldn't be any action during the middle of the day, but unless there's sitting there waiting and seeing deer gritting underneath of you at 11, 12 o'clock, that'd be the only reason to really stay in. Is that what you're trying to say?
Right. I just don't see the bucks on their feet cruising much when the temperatures are that warm. It's just very uncomfortable for them. And if they do move, it's not going to be that far like you might typically see during the rut. So a buck, instead of being on his feet cruising for, say, 2 hours, maybe he's up on his feet for 20 minutes, and he gets hot and takes a drink and lays back down. So,
Yeah, so
that
for hunters preparing, they probably need to obviously there's always anomaly. We're not saying that it can't happen, but be prepared if for some reason you're in that magic spot with the wind blowing out of that bedding area and you're right in the right area, not getting busted. You could have some activity. Be prepared to stay all day if the action's there. But I think that's what we're trying to say. We might be not doing a very good job communicating it, but
Right. Well, the rut's going to happen. The weather may shut down daylight activity, and it may shut down or decrease the intensity of the rut, but the rut's going to happen, and it's going to happen at the same time. And the bad thing is for this weather pattern that we're in is that it's happening at a time where the bucks are typically the mature bucks are typically most active. They're searching for those does, and just based on the weather report, by the time we get a cold spell, we're going to be in the lockdown phase, which is, in my opinion, about the toughest time of the entire year to kill a giant on purpose. Now, it happens, but it doesn't happen that often, and it doesn't really happen on purpose. So,
yeah, and I mean, all it takes is one doe, running crazy in what is it, 7, 8, 9 days, and to change everything, and you never know what you're going to get. Let's talk a little bit about the people. I'm in this situation right now with no specific target buck. I do have a good, very good buck, but on the other properties, not necessarily a buck that I know of that's still there, but is now the time to go back and start looking at trail camera pictures from last year, because there's bucks I can't account for. I don't know, but I had a really good picture of them one day coming through last year, say on November 5th, when I'm going to be in Illinois. Is that something that we can, if we don't have a target, we're not on something, using that annual data to try to put us in the right spot that he might show back up?
yeah, I mean, that annual data, if that buck's still alive, is most of the time going to hold true. The big question a lot of times is we don't know if that buck's still alive. And I talked about last week, at the end of last season, I think I had 17 bucks that I over 150 inches that I thought survived last year. And I think in another week or two, I'm going to have enough cameras checked and enough handle on each of these locations to give a report. But chasing the giants, you just, it's a game of odds, and the odds are not real good for any one tactic or any one period of the season, but you combine them and you're just hoping that at some point during the season you pull out that winning card and you're in the right stand on the right day and the buck comes along and boom, you got him. So that past trail camera history gives us the hope we need to get out there and get in the right stand. And who knows, that buck could still be alive and he could come by and then he could change your season. You might be having the worst season of your life, and in 5 seconds, all of a sudden you've got the best season of your life.
I just have to believe that there's a group of our listeners that it might be in the same boat as I am this year, where it's, you want to hunt, you got to pick your spots, you're trying to keep intrusion down, but you just don't know where to go and don't necessarily have the confidence in, closing the deal on a specific buck. I think now is the time that's why we keep all these trail cameras. We don't just delete them and save a picture, screenshot on our phone. Saving and librarying this data in times like this can be a great tool to at least put you in the spot, like you said, if he's still alive, if there's not outside factors that are there, at least it's got somewhat of what's the term I've used before, a Moneyball approach, where you're trying to increase your odds of being in the right place at the right time.
hmm And I think with the status of at least the deer herd in my area, and I think it probably goes a lot further. I think there's a lot of hunters in the same situation. I've talked to numerous really serious big buck hunters that do not have a good buck to chase this year. And I did my buck forecast back right before season opened, and I said I thought it was going to be a down year because um, the mature bucks that I would typically see, I'm just not seeing them. So I'm guessing there's a lot of other hunters in the same boat.
So my plan, I'm going to be coming to Illinois this week, later in the week, even though it's going to be hot. Normally I try to pick and choose, but no matter what the temperature is, those peak days of the rut, I'm going to be in a tree somewhere. So I'm coming up. I'm going to be packed for an all-day sit. If the action's there, I'm going to be prepared to do so. I want to, and obviously I'm going to use annual pattern data on where I go, as long as it's the right weather and wind. Let's talk a little bit about this time of year and food sources. So do you see any correlation when the weather's warm and we have a decision to make? Don't have trail camera pictures for annual pattern. If I have areas that say is a wheat field that's starting to sprout up versus dry beans or corn that's just got planted, is there a rhyme or wrong reason to go to one or the other when the temperature is high? I think there's this rule of thumb out that when the temperature is high, we go to green, try to set green, and when it's cold, we go to grain. What's your thoughts on that as we approach here the pre-rut?
Yeah, that's spot on. Just look at the normal temperature for that time of the year. And if the temperature is above normal, the deer seem to like the greens a whole lot better. And if it's below normal, they'll be in the grain a lot harder. And, that tells us that in the next week or so, we need to be sitting on those green food sources.
So I'm not teeing up a real world commercial here, but I'm trying to spark ideas for guys setting in tree stands the next 2 weeks, because I know we all try to set in tree stands thinking of ways to make a stand better. This is a perfect example of what we talk about with diversity. And if you have one food source, one big spot that you've planted that we talk about on this podcast, having green and grain in the same place versus just having a soybean field, your neighbor might have a green field and it might not have gotten a heavy frost yet, and the alfalfa is still somewhat palatable, or there might be clover over there, or brassicas, a deadly dozen mix. Having everything in one spot, this is where it's very pivotal when we have real highs, real lows. We don't know what the weather's going to be. I'm still going to be in the same spot in the same tree.
Yeah, right. You don't want to get caught without the food that the deer prefer during that time when you're hunting the most. So diversity is key. I preach it all the time with food sources. If you put all your eggs in one basket and it's not greens, well, this coming week, you might be out of luck a little bit. A lot of it comes down to pressure too. I mean, they may spend their daylight hours on a property that don't have much pressure. And then once the sun goes down, they head out for a green food source. It might be a winter wheat field just coming on
Right.
that's on the neighbor. So be looking for those green food sources this week.
Yeah. So, I mean, strategy wise, hunt bedding in the morning, food green if possible in the evenings, and hope for the best with annual pattern. I think there's just got to be a lot of people in the same boat. I really do.
There is no doubt about it. I've talked to a lot of them.
All right, well, let's take a quick break and listen to a message from our friends at ASIO. This podcast is coming out on October 30th. October 31st is the last day to take advantage of a 20% off. This isn't a Chasing Giants sale. This is a sale that ASIO is doing that even gives you 5% more than our normal discount that we have for podcast listeners. So make sure, if you want camo, especially for late season, the Sherpa is awesome. The backpack is awesome. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast. Use coupon code RUT22 at ASIOgear.com and get your 20% off. Tomorrow is the last day. So I don't know the facts about whether it's midnight Eastern time. I would assume so, since they're based out of the Carolinas. Midnight at on the 31st, I would guess, would be when the code expires. So make sure you head over if you're looking for camo and use your 20% savings coupon RUT22 at OsseoGear.com.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear, prepare to be invisible.
All right. Well, last week we had this question that I laughed at first when you read it off. It was about a listener asking if the DNR would transplant and put, different exotic animals, mountain lions, wolves. I guess the word's not exotic. That's not the right choice of words, but introduce those things into the habitat without telling people. And that was your one time you could have really thrown DNR under the bus, but you didn't. You said you don't think it happens. But as soon as we talk about it, Illinois had some big news this week, and I want to talk about it a little bit on the podcast. I think it's very ironic.
Yeah, the crazy thing is that I think it was on Monday, right after the last podcast was released.
Yep.
I heard from a listener in Iowa, southeast Iowa, sent me a picture of a mountain lion that he got on his trail camera, and that mountain lion had a radio collar on it. Well, we corresponded back and forth just a little bit, and he said that mountain lion had been radio collared in Nebraska, and they had tracked it through southern Iowa. And he told me, he says, it's in Illinois right now. And I thought, well, he probably knows, because he sent the picture he got to his DNR. And lo and behold, the very next day on Tuesday, Illinois DNR does a press release, and they say there's a mountain lion in Illinois. It's illegal to shoot him, this and that. It's got a radio collar on. It was radio collared in Nebraska. It traveled through southern Iowa and got to Illinois. And so they put out a press release telling people they can't shoot it. If you run into a mountain lion, you're supposed to raise your hands and look big and, I don't know, scream at it or something. But then on social media yesterday, I seen where Illinois DNR tranquilized that cat just outside of Springfield, Illinois. And I'm telling you what, that is a long ways from Nebraska through all the way across to Iowa. I mean, I've drove to western Iowa, and it's about an 8-hour drive for me. And that cat walked farther than that, ends up in Springfield, Illinois. And it all happens just days after you and I had talked about on the podcast last week. So it was kind of interesting.
Well, he went that far, but he wasn't walking the center lane of an interstate. I mean, you got to think these animals are walking cross country,
Right.
All kinds of obstacles, canyons, hollers, rivers.
Swam the Mississippi River.
That's probably the most eyebrow raising part of the whole thing. Yep. But yeah, just a day after we talked about it. Now, the one that we talked about last week, it was not. For the people who might think it's the same, it was not the same. The one that we were talking about last week was hit by a car, I believe.
Right. It was hit by a car in Illinois. So there's been, just this fall, there's been 2 different mountain lions, at least, that we know for sure, in Illinois. But they were not released by the Illinois DNR.
It'll be interesting one day to hear the thoughts, because, Dr. Strickland, we talk about him a lot and how he specializes in whitetail at the Mississippi State Deer Lab. I'm sure that there's people like Dr. Strickland that study mountain lions. Everybody's kind of got their own topic and species. It'd be really interesting one day if we could figure out, what the theory is, why 2 mountain lions basically headed east about the same time, and what the possible ideas on why that happened. I think it's just phenomenal. And then you wonder how much of it really happens, or how many of them really do it and don't live, or something happens or whatnot. So
Yeah, well, that happens in Illinois every couple of years. There's one in Illinois, and DNR does not deny it. In fact, they shot one in a guy's barn just 2 or 3 years ago here in Illinois. There's one killed on railroad tracks here in Illinois not too many years ago. There was actually one in downtown Chicago along the railroad tracks, some railroad tracks in Chicago. And I believe that one had been tracked too through DNA somehow. And it came down through Wisconsin, but a lot of these are coming through Iowa, they say. But I'm no cat expert, but if the DNR was releasing them, there would be, we would know about it. They wouldn't do it secretly. In fact, you couldn't keep that a secret. But it's just the timing of it's really interesting.
Yeah. And I'm not sure, and I'm not going to say on a public podcast what my decision will be if I walk through a bean field in the middle of the night and looked at 2 green eyes looking at me and saw big teeth. I'm not sure what I would do, but.
Did you see that video of the guy that was hunting elk out west, and the cat came at him, and he had a handgun?
Yep.
And can you imagine being out there and you don't have a handgun? I mean, you'd be kitty littered before too long.
This fat boy can't run. This fat boy can't run that fast. Maybe I could throw down a couple Little Debbie snack cakes for him, and maybe he'd prefer those over me.
Well, I'd just build a high fence around myself, and I'd be safe.
Oh, I'll see. The people that watch your social media today are giggling because they understand the 2 references there. But we're not gonna go there. I think we're not gonna give the gratitude to some of these people, but.
Well, we're doing something right, or we wouldn't be irritating the demons of these people. So,
I bet I got, I'm not exaggerating, I bet I got over 700 messages today wishing me happy birthday, and just ton of support. I actually was at my son and my daughter are in the marching band at their school, and their state championship was this week. They made state and went down there and just did an awesome job. This puts everything into perspective, and it's hard for me not to even get emotional talking about it, but get a private message from a podcast listener from Western Kentucky that was there watching his kid. His kid was in a class 3A band. My kid was in a 1A band, and ended up sending a message to each other. And I walked out in the tunnel, and we sat there and talked for 15 minutes. And Don, very little of it was about hunting. He wanted to talk about church. And at the end of the day, without getting emotional and sounding like a 4th grade girl tearing up, that puts everything into perspective right there. And if some people want to make fake accounts and get on there and be trolls, that's fine, because if we're doing a good enough job to make a difference in one person's life, I can sleep at night knowing that. I think that was really cool. So got to meet quite a few people this weekend. I found out people listen to the podcast that I would have never dreamed to listen. So the future head band dad of Williamstown Independent Schools listens to the podcast. I told him it's that, Ricky, now you're famous. Not only are you the head band dad, but you're also going to be mentioned on the podcast this week. So he ought to get a kick out of that as he's listening to it. Well, what else? Do you have anything else you want to talk about? We got 5 really good questions tonight, and I want to make sure we leave enough time to do good justice to those. So, do you have anything you want to talk about before we move on?
Just 2 things. I had a podcast listener wanted to know about getting tickets to that Kansas event. Do you have the outline there, Terry, with that phone number?
While you're talking and making up some ad lib
Okay.
conversation, I will pull it up. We'll see how good
Okay.
you are at stuff on the fly.
So this event is February 18th in Salina, Kansas. It's being put on by our Real World distributor out there. It's a 1-day event. I think they're calling it the Whitetail Summit, and that is going to be there's going to be 3 speakers. It's going to be myself, Wes Delks, and Dr. Bronson Strickland. There's going to be a catered barbecue lunch, and I believe the price for the whole event, lunch and all, is like $60. But there is a limit. I think that this facility will only hold about 500 people, and we mentioned it last week, but I forgot to mention the phone number. If you want tickets, Terry's going to give you the phone number right now.
Yeah, the number is 785-949-2204. 785-949-2204. And I believe that the promoters of that event sent us a flyer on that. So we'll share that for the people. I'll put that up on the screen right now for the people watching on YouTube. Don, who are they calling when they call this number? That's not you or I. It's not Real World.
Right.
Who's the promoters of this event so they know who they're calling?
It'll be Phillips Seed Farm, who's a distributor for Real World products in Kansas. The gentleman you'll want to talk to is Jeremy, but no matter who answers the phone, they're gonna know and be able to take care of you. But Jeremy at Phillips Seed Farm is putting on this event, and we look forward to being there.
What's the town that the event's held in? Because it's a neighboring town to where Phillips is, right?
Yeah, it's Salina, Kansas.
Salina, Kansas. So all of our friends listening on MTech, Salina, Kansas on February 18th. I'll read the number one more time, 785-949-2204. The people watching on YouTube, the flyer's up on the screen. And then we wanted to also do a reminder, speaking of MTech and the other dial-in services, we wanted to do a reminder for our Amish Mennonite friends without internet, how you guys can submit questions for the podcast.
Yeah, we got a request for that this week from an Amish listener. The address that you want to send those questions to, just send it to Real World Wildlife Products. And that address is P.O. Box 5555 in Arthur, Illinois. And the zip code is 61911.
Please be aware that Miss Janice reads these when they open them, when she opens them up and puts them in a stack or envelope for Dawn. So the people asking about how far down the scrotum hangs, just remember that Janice gives us a really weird look in the morning when Don walks in to pick up his questions.
Janice knows all about the king buck now. She's read enough king buck questions.
Well, before we do the questions, you didn't have this on the thing, the outline, but this week you held your first Whitetail Academy test run for a live Q&A, and you're going to plan on doing this every month for your the upper level subscription service people. And you know, you have to kind of test some of these out to get better at it and be good at it. There wasn't a lot of notice, but again, it was a trial run. You had a good crowd on there. We need to figure out a way to get you some more bandwidth at your house for your internet. We stalled it out and hesitated a little bit, and then you got some guy making ornery questions. I don't know who he was.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at him right now, but yeah, that went off pretty smooth actually. You know, the questions just kept rolling in. There was no dead space where we was waiting for the next question. So appreciate everybody that took part in that. And anybody that's interested, all you got to do is join the Whitetail Master Academy, and once a month it'll be a live, very similar to this, except it's live. So I don't know what questions are coming at me. Here I get to pick and choose the questions that are submitted, but in that forum, they're just throwing them at me, and I don't have any time to prepare or even think about them.
Yeah, and a lot of people have reached out to me saying, tell Don to use it, Microsoft Teams or Zoom. The strategy here is we need to get it to where we can keep it self-contained on the website. That way the people who miss it can go back and watch them. Even though you can record, it's just better for the system that you and Bruce and Steve have put together to try to, for right now, at least try to keep it captive on the website. And the chat function that's inside of it works really well, because as Don's asking or answering questions, you can submit your questions off to the side in a chat window, and then sometimes Steve is putting them up in the middle of the screen, and then sometimes he's not. Depends on if I'm asking questions about couples massages or not. For
I knew who that was coming from before I even seen the initials TP on that
well,
question.
you even missed the first one. There was actually two, and I was doing it just to keep it a little bit lively, because you know, I didn't want it to I knew you were, you know, trying to navigate it for the first time. Steve was in his home office in Cincinnati. You were up there by yourself. We were having I was texting Robin back and forth to check a few things, and I dared her to come in and make faces at you through the office door, but she wasn't brave enough to do it. I was trying to pull all the stops out for you, buddy, just so you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I appreciate that. That's what good friends are for.
All right. Well, let's get to the first question of the night. I want to leave some time for these because I think you picked out 5 good ones this week.
So the first one comes from Devin Allen from Jonesboro, Arkansas. He says, I have found my first Arkansas booner, but he is living in a 1.5 acre block of woods in the middle of cut ag fields. I can't access it to set up cameras without bumping him out. What would you recommend to try and secure the deal on this buck? Well, Devin, what you described is exactly what I deal with quite a bit, actually, on the properties that I hunt. A lot of little tracts of ground. Often they're totally surrounded by ag fields. And if I was in your shoes, season is open. Last thing you want to do is go in there and bump that buck. If I was you, I would go in the middle of the night. Believe it or not, I've done this before. I've waited till like 11 o'clock at night to go in and hang stands before, and it'll work really well on a full moon night. And I would not try to sneak in there to do it. I would be on an ATV or even a pickup truck, and I would drive right across the field. I would leave the truck running, lights on and everything as you hang your stand. But that's what I would do, and then just get out. If you can also do it right before rain, where it's going to wash your scent away, that would be fantastic as well. Give the area 2 or 3 days to settle down and slip back in there some morning way ahead of daylight. 2 hours ahead of daylight's not too soon. It's way better to be an hour early than a minute late. And there's been more than once I've hung stands in the dark just because I knew it was a small piece of cover, and I just knew that there was a good buck bedding in there, and I needed to wait late enough that I knew he had cleared out for the evening.
Yeah, so I'm not doing my job if I don't ask you why, and let's dive into this a little bit further, because I'm sure that there's some people that's like, oh, that's a great idea, and they understand it, and some of our younger hunters or more inexperienced people, or maybe people from big timber, won't understand it. So is the theory there is you're waiting late enough for that buck to get off his bed and go out to wherever he's feeding, and he's nowhere close to that bedding area. And even if you bump them in the open field and they run off somewhere, it's not relating intrusion to that core sanctuary in the middle or the island.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, he's going to definitely, he's going to be in his bed during the day. He's going to get up in the evening, right around dark. He may get up a little bit before dark, but most of the time in those settings, that buck, if he's a mature buck, he's going to wait till it's dark. And then he's going to come out of that little piece of cover and he's going to go feeding, but also looking for does. And he could cover miles before morning and be back. Now, the thing you also got to realize is he probably doesn't bed there every single day. He probably does a lot, because it sounds like the perfect type of place where a big mature buck would hide and nobody would bother him. So he probably is using it pretty regular. But don't get discouraged if the first morning you go in to hunt and you don't see him, he doesn't show up. Just slip out and wait till the conditions are right, the wind direction's right, and go in and do it again.
So what's the theory on leaving the truck running with the headlights on versus trying to walk? I mean, we use quiet cats all the time. Why not try to slip in there completely undetected and quiet? What's the theory on keeping it running with the lights on?
Well, he described the situation as open ag fields all around this little piece of woods, and there's very, very likely to be deer feeding in those ag fields. And the last thing you want to do is slip up on those deer and surprise them at a short distance. It's way better for them to see that truck coming or that ATV coming from a mile away, and they've got time to just move off to the side, and they'll just get out of the way far enough to let you pass or whatever. And if you're out there with that machine running while you're hanging that stand, they're just going to stand back and probably watch the headlights or whatever. And it's just way better. It's way less pressure on those deer than trying to slip in quiet and not using lights at all or anything like that.
The ultimate thing would be doing it while they were harvesting the crops in the field that day and using a tractor or something that it looked just like another piece of equipment that's driving around that field at all times. And
Yep.
but at the same time, I don't want to misrepresent your answer in saying that this is how you could check your trail cameras every other week. We're talking about a once in, once out thing. You're not talking about going in and pulling trail camera cards all the time this way, right?
Yeah, and this is not ideal. Ideally, that stand would have been hung last winter, right after season. And that's the other thing. If you don't get that deer this year and he survives, well, have your setup ready to go, not just your stand, your shooting lanes and everything. Maybe even hang a rope scrape in there this winter for next year. And I wouldn't even worry about going in and setting it up. If it's in a good spot, he's going to find it and he's going to work it.
Yep. That's a great piece of advice there. I know we've talked about checking trail cameras in the summertime where we've pulled up against these little isolated pockets of woods and had the windows down, the radio blaring and everything else, because we're notifying that deer that something's happening and something's coming and giving him the option to get up and scoot or to lay tight. The last thing we want to do is step on his tail and have him surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned something, this isn't part of the question that was asked. You just mentioned something about a rope scrape. I think this is an opportunity for the people who are wanting to put rope scrapes out to start thinking about it, buying it, cutting it to, 6-7 foot lengths and start coiling it up and laying them up in a tree in your backyard with a zip tie and start getting that stuff to weather. It seems like all of our listeners want to do this kind of stuff, but they wait till the last minute. And if you have downtime now between Christmas, it's a perfect opportunity to weather these things in your backyard. If you go outside and look at my backyard right now, there's about 5 or 6 up and coiled up, laying on branches in tree limbs, just to be ready for next year when I need it. So another little tidbit there. All right, question number 2. Let's put it up on the screen for you.
Hey, Spinks from Quiet Cat here in our virtual showroom space where you can connect with a product expert and learn all about our bikes, our accessories, and what makes Quiet Cat the leader in off-road electric bikes. Schedule a live session today by clicking in the link below or going to quietcat.com/meet.
Okay, this one comes from Kirk Stillwell from Blue Springs, Missouri. He says, "Hello, Don. On this podcast, you talk about clean 8s at 3 years old, rarely make big jumps in antler growth. I believe this to be true myself, as I have observed multiple deer over the past several years that have followed that script. One of my target bucks, who was a big framed 8 at what I believe to be 3 years old based on pictures of him the year prior at 2 with unique G2s, who is now 6 and is a 7-point with the same frame after having a nearly identical rack over the last 3 years. With that being said, I recently got pictures of a 3-year-old from last year that has a very similar rack this year, but added a 4-inch drop tine. My question is, if a clean 8 adds something like this as a 4-year-old, what are the odds that they keep adding more non-typical points as they age, and when you take them off the call hit list and see what happens at 5 or 6 years old? Thanks for all the great info on the podcast. Well, Kirk, the majority of bucks that are smooth, clean racked 8-pointers at 3 years old are going to remain that way throughout their life. The majority. There is going to be some where that's not going to be the case, however. And, I've got one buck on my farm right now who's a perfect example. At 3 years old, he was a clean 8, just as he was at 2 years old. And when he was 3, my son-in-law was trying to get him shot. And that would have been the year that I shot Mel 2 years ago. That buck's 5 now. Well, the buck today, he's got a 10-point. Actually, he's a 4-year-old. The very next year, he added extra tines on each side and he became a 10-point with one little sticker off a G2. And this year he's even got a couple more stickers and it still has the 10-point frame. But that's not typical. That is not something that's going to happen very often. And Terry talks about Moneyball. You got to play the odds, and the odds are that a clean 8 is going to stay a clean 8. Now you're asking about bucks adding extra stuff, once they start. And my experience is that once they start adding extras, they're always going to have extras. Now, he may always be a clean 8 with just a drop tine, but next year he may have drop tines on both sides. He may be a 10-point or a 9-point with a drop tine. So yeah, some older bucks will start adding points, but the majority of 8-pointers will not.
I think that the biggest misconception in this dialogue is you're talking about culling these smooth rack 8s, not because you don't ever think that they have the potential to possibly be a mid 150s buck, which would be the majority of people's target buck. You're managing for the elite right side of the bell curve, which is world-class deer. So I think the misconception here is everybody says, oh, well, I need to kill all the small 8-pointers at 3 years old but if their goal is to have a 150-inch deer, it might not be necessarily the exact same approach. Now, I do think that people tend to shoot the 150 or 145-10 3-year-old before the 145, 5-year-old, or 3-year-old or 4-year-old. And that's still a valid conversation. But when we're talking about taking out these 8-pointers, especially the ones with short brow tines, like the buck that I shot on the south end of your farm out of the ladder stand where people see at the master class, that buck was never going to be anything. His brow tines were only 1.5 inches tall with an 8-point frame. So that's the ones that we're talking about. But if your goal as a hunter is to kill a mature 145 to 155 deer, that's not exactly what you're talking about and Dr. Strickland wrote the book on managing that higher ceiling for world-class whitetail.
Well, something that the captive deer taught me was that when it comes to bucks in an age class, the better bucks in each age class are going to be the better bucks in the next age class. So in other words, the best 1.5-year-old bucks you have right now, next year, those same bucks are going to be the best 2-year-olds, and those are going to be the best 3-year-olds. By the time they're 3, you've got a really good handle. As yearlings and 2-year-olds, there's not a whole lot you can do. Just let nature take its course with those deer. A lot of them are going to get killed. But by the time they're 3, you should have, if you're a real serious land manager or deer hunter, you should have a really good handle on the better 3-year-olds on your property. And those are the ones you want to live. And the lesser ones, at 3 years old are the ones you want to take out. And most of the time, those are going to be smooth rack 8-pointers. And, whether they're going to add points or not, I'm telling you, most of the time they're not. And sure, there's going to be exceptions to the rule. And I seen it on social media. People say, this buck was an 8-pointer at 3. Look what he is at 5. Yep, I'm telling you, there's all kinds of exceptions. But the vast majority of the time, I'm talking like probably over 80% of the time, the clean 8s are going to stay clean 8s, and they're going to be the smaller rack bucks in that age class.
Yep. So, I mean, it's just, this is where we're trying to provide advice that is catered to a very high level of management program. And we know that there's listeners here that don't have the means or desire to get to that point. They're just picking up other tips. So again, take it and put pieces of these conversations in place with what your goals, your objectives are. It's not up to us to tell you what to shoot. It's just you have to up your chances when you're talking about having properties that hold bucks that not only get of upper age class, but that also have the genetic ceiling of an antler size that are capable of getting big. It's kind of the whole premise of this podcast. So great question. Hope that makes sense. All right, let's put the next one up.
Okay, the next one comes from Brian Byers from Decatur, Illinois. He says, Don and Terry, thank you guys for putting together an excellent podcast. I look forward to listening to it every week. I have a question related to intrusion and trail cameras. Most trail cameras that I have used, including Reconyx, do not automatically update the time setting for daylight savings. So to get the correct timestamp on the photos from the trail camera, it requires a visit to the trail camera to update the time clock setting. How do you guys deal with this situation? Do you guys just mentally adjust for the incorrect timestamp on the photo, knowing that the timestamp will be incorrect after the time change? Or do you try to update the time clock on the camera when you visit the camera at the next opportunity? I'm struggling with balancing intrusion with long-term data collection. Maybe Reconyx or other trail camera folks can upgrade their firmware so that the camera can automatically adjust the time clock for daylight savings time change. Best of luck to you both on this year's season. Thanks and God bless. Brian, two things. First of all, Reconyx does now, their new cameras, the Hyperfire camera does automatically change with daylight savings time. So that's not an issue with the new Reconyx Hyperfire cameras.
The cell camera or the regular camera?
The regular.
Really?
I think the cell does too, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, they automatically adjust. Yep. When you set that camera up, when you first get it, you'll have to put your state in there. And so it'll know which time zone you're in. And then it'll ask you automatically change for daylight savings time or whatever. But yeah, it'll do it. The bigger issue or point that I want to make with your question, Brian, is, I'm not worried about that camera, that timestamp down to the hour. I want the date. The date's got to be correct. It doesn't matter to me if he shows up right now or an hour from now. That's really not information on the annual pattern that makes that much difference. And the reason for it is, I think I'm getting a lot of correspondence from deer hunters about the same time, same place, theory idea that I put together several years ago. And I think people take it a little bit too literal. I don't mean that, I get a buck's picture on this tree at 5 o'clock on October 15th. Next year at 5 o'clock on October 15th, he's going to be standing right in front of that tree. That's taking it a little bit too far. But next year on October 15th, he's going to be right there in that part of his range. I mean, he's not going to be a mile away. He's going to be right there in that part of his range, probably on the same property. That does not mean he's going to be standing in the exact same spot he was a year ago to the minute. So I think people take that a little bit too literal, and that's why I use this question. I don't think the hour stamp being an hour off on your photo is that big a deal. Now, what I do, my older Reconyx do not, the HC600s are my older ones. They do not, automatically change for daylight savings time and such. So the next time I check that camera, or those cameras, I will manually change it to the correct time. But the big thing is that hour is not that big a deal.
Yeah, so think about a deer having a core range where he shifts and goes back and forth, whatever this range is, and that's what I think most hunters don't. They don't run as many cameras as you do across bigger areas to see where these deer go and how far they go. But what you're saying is that that window, not down to the minute, hour, and it's a couple day window where he's going to be back in a different part of his core area and revisiting. That's why we talked in the opener about a possible strategy for you guys that are listening. I would hate to think that a hunter would take it so literally that says, I'm not going to go get in my stand until 4:58 when the buck came through at 6:05 and then get down because he's not there. But yeah, I think a lot of people do take what we say is exact literal, and I think we have to use a little.
Okay, this question comes from Ryan Dambacher from Auburn, Illinois. Ryan says, I've been a listener since episode 1 and look forward to the Sunday night weekly release. My family is very fortunate to have a great property to chase bucks on. The only problem is it is 60 minutes away from my home, and with a young family and a career, it is hard to spend the time I need to get everything done I want to yearly. I'm looking at adding a hunting property. One is available within my price range within 2 minutes of my home. It is a mix of woods and tillable, but due to the layout and neighbors, I know it will never be a world-class place to kill mature bucks. If purchased, I will probably build a home there, and I would be able to spend a lot of time on habitat projects and property improvement. Would you consider purchasing this, knowing it will never be exceptional property, but would be a great place to complete countless habitat projects and take kids into the outdoors regularly and have a crack at a mature deer every several years versus waiting for a better one to be available, knowing that it will be further than my home? Also, I want to commend you on the commitment to family and faith in your podcast. It has helped me on my own journey as a father, where sadly I once put chasing bucks ahead of things I no longer do. Well, I'm very familiar with Ryan actually, and actually have been to his farm. Consulted on it a few years ago, several years ago actually, and Ryan's killed some absolute giants. Um, those that follow me on social media may remember a couple years ago, maybe it's been longer than that now, but maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I posted a picture of a giant buck in the bucket of a John Deere tractor. That was Ryan's buck. So those that follow me close, and I know there's some of you out there, you'll remember that picture of that giant buck in the loader of the John Deere tractor. That was Ryan's buck. So, Ryan, personally, you noted in your submission that the new property you buy, you're going to build a house on. Well, why couldn't you build a house on another property that has more deer potential? That's the first thing that jumped out at me. And maybe it's because you want to keep your kids in a certain school district or something like that. And I totally get that. Actually, I commend you for putting your family ahead of your deer hunting. And it sounds like you and I made the same mistakes when we was younger. I put deer hunting above everything in the world for too many years, and finally, realized there's a lot of things way more important than deer hunting. And I'm glad that you opened your eyes probably a lot earlier than I did, or a lot younger age than I did. So I commend you for putting your family first. And really, Ryan, it's a question that only you can answer, because the fact that you said you want to build a house on that property, could you build a house on another property that's better suited for deer hunting? And if you want to stay in that area for whatever reason, what can you do to that property to make it better? Are all the neighbors bad? I mean, I don't know the details, but surely there's some things that can be done to make that property the best it can be. And maybe you've noted that you already have a really good property to hunt on that's an hour from your house. Maybe this other property is just one where you spend a lot of time with your family. You take your kids on their first hunt right there on that property, and you have them helping you on habitat projects and whatever. And and it's a more relaxed property, if you will, where you're not so worried about things like human intrusion. Instead, you just let your kids go wild and do what they want in the woods and on the property, and you still have a chance to shoot some deer there. So in the end, it's a question only you can answer.
And yeah, it's down to everybody's personal situation, what funds they have available, what land's available in that area. And I think no matter what you do, you can try to make the most of it. But I think it goes back. We talked about this probably a year and a half ago. It's really hard to have a property that does everything unless it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to have a property that you can cut firewood on every year and then ride four-wheelers on and then take your kids out camping and then expect to be able to manage it for consistent, mature bucks. What we do is this passion for, upper age class and very large deer is kind of selfish when it comes to our, needs and wants out of a piece of land. It's hard to have a real multi-use property and try to do what we're doing. And I get it that people have families and want to do it. I think you even talked about it in the master class, or not in the master class, but the great debate with Tony LaPratt. It's just, you have to make the decision of what's right for you and what funds you have available to buy property, where you're at, all that type of stuff. But really difficult to have one piece of property that does everything unless it's lots and lots and lots of acres, which ironically neither one of us have. I don't know where that comes from either.
Well, I think Satan's out there putting ideas in people's head because he doesn't like where we're going with this podcast, Terry. So
that's a given. So
yeah,
all
no
right,
doubt about that.
Last question of the night.
Last one comes from Colin Cole, and I think this is supposed to be Toledo, Illinois. Colin says, "Hello, Don and Terry. My question is about your properties. Knowing what you both know now, what would you do different on your properties if you were starting over again? What were some things you thought would work but ended up not? What things would you focus on doing to make it the best property possible? Thank you for everything you guys do and keep sharing your faith. Good luck this season." Well, Colin, the thing that jumps out about me and what I would do different, when I started 30 years ago on this property, I had cattle, beef cattle, and most of the property was a big cattle pasture. And in fact, my sanctuary today was a cattle pasture, all of it pretty much, except for where my switchgrass is. And there was a little creek that ran through that pasture, and there was a scattering of some big oaks. But other than that, from the road, you could see clear through the property, clear to the backside. And I enrolled it in a CRP program and planted it into trees. And the big regret that I have is the species of trees that I planted. And if I had to do it over again, I would definitely be planting different tree species than what was originally planted. Back at that time, there was not, the emerald ash borer was not a thing. And I planted a lot of ash trees because they grew fast. And I was trying to create cover in a hurry, had no patience. And, I didn't realize how quickly 25, 30 years would go by. And so I had a bunch of ash trees planted, and today the borers have got into those trees, and most of them are dead. The ones that are not are in very poor shape. I would have planted a lot more oak trees. Specifically, I would have planted a lot of shingle oaks. And here's a tip for you land managers. A lot of guys get really, really wrapped up in evergreen or conifer trees, spruce, pine, cedars. I think that's going to provide them the best cover. Well, I'm here to tell you a shingle oak tree will provide every bit the cover and better cover than a pine tree or a spruce tree or a cedar tree. If you see those oak trees, they don't even have really an oak shaped leaf, but they've got the brown leaves that they hold all winter long. You can see pictures of snow on the ground, but those oak trees will still have those brown leaves, really thick and dense. You can't see through it. I would have planted a lot more shingle oaks in that CRP mix. I planted a number of pines and cedars back in the day. I would have shifted that to a lot more shingle oaks. I did plant some pin oaks, which also hold their leaves, but I don't believe they compare to the shingle oak. That would have been the big thing. And most of the other mistakes I made was based on placement. And like I when I started, I placed my food plots in the center of the property, right in the middle of all the cover, thinking the deer would use them more. Well, they used them plenty, but it was very difficult to hunt. And over the years, I've corrected those mistakes, and that's why I think it's the value I bring as a consultant is I've made mistakes. Everything that I learned the hard way. It wasn't because I read it the right way in a book and ran out there and did it. It's I did it wrong first, seen my mistake, seen why it was wrong, lived it, corrected it, and now it's running smooth. So I've made those mistakes and I've corrected those mistakes, and a lot of it had to do with the layout of the property. So those would be the two big ones for me: the tree species I planted and the layout, which I've corrected. How about your property?
Well, the biggest regret I have this year is not standing up when I saw a buck coming in early enough and then getting jammed up and not getting a shot. But I don't think that's what he's asking on this one. Um, I think my farm is very typical of what a lot of deer hunters have, where it's not necessarily the shape. Mine's long and narrow. Um, but I have access from one direction. I don't have a property where I can come in from different directions based on different winds or access. And I guess I fell into the trap early in hunting with thinking that if you come and you park at the barn and you need to go, you go all the way to the back of the property and hunt the back property line. Well, if everybody goes to the back of their property, you got 6 hunters and within 1,000 yards of each other hunting the same spot, and you're blowing deer across your whole property. And you challenged me a long time ago to rethink that and try to set the property, even if it's a long and narrow property with access from one side, pull everything forward. Put access around the perimeter, not down the middle. And basically your areas to get from point A to point B are always on the property line, going around, leaving the core, and then trying to pull the deer forward, letting all of the back be sanctuary for everybody else to push into, and then you pulling out to your side. So to say that I regret it, I don't regret anything, because I think it makes you who you are. It's the lessons you learn as an outdoorsman. So I'm not real big on the, what do you regret doing? I regret sometimes how poor of a Christian I've been, or a poor of a father or husband I've been over the years with bad decisions. But as far as every opportunity that I've had in the deer woods, I've been extremely blessed. And when I have screwed up, even this year, you try to learn from them and move on, and become better. That's what it's about. But so I don't really regret anything, but I think it's just adapting to your property, learning more, and continuing to make it better.
Great answer.
But
Yep.
I think there's a lot of people that think they have to go to the back of their farm though to hunt, and they're just
Yeah.
basically pushing deer off every time they walk back. It took me a long time to figure that out.
I think everybody does it, or a lot of people do it. And I wonder if everybody ends up right back there in the back corner and looking at each other. They've just pushed all the deer clear off to the next section doing it.
Yeah, I'm to the point now. I think I could hunt out of my barn. I really do.
Mhm.
I mean, it's the way things have changed, and I've adapted things over the years. I really think that putting bedding towards the back and food towards the front gives you a whole lot more opportunities to get in and out undetected.
Mhm.
Which I haven't shot that buck this year, but I've been in and out enough times without being busted. It's worked. So. I did get a couple messages. We talked last week, and I shared a trail camera picture of that buck laying in a scrape. I did get a couple more people that sent me messages of deer laying in a scrape. I thought that was really cool. I didn't say it last week, but I sent you a picture over a day and was it 2 days window? 3 different bucks had laid in that scrape. So I don't know what's going on, but it's learning from it as we go, I guess.
I'll tell you what, I checked, I checked 8 cameras, I think, yesterday, and a lot of those were on scrapes. And the scrape activity in the past week or so has been fantastic. The bucks have really been hitting scrapes.
Yeah. I have on the home farm, I have 5 cameras on scrapes, and one of them is a rope scrape. And I don't know if it has, Smokey's not telling us to say this, or we're not paid by Smokey. The only thing that's odd to me about these 3 different bucks in 2 days that laid in the scrape. Now, this is at dark. It doesn't help me at all as a hunter, because this is in the middle of the night. Is that's the only one that he gave us that little test bottle of that tarsal gland lure for us to try this year. And I went in, and that's the only scrape that I poured it in. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it, or it's just the spot where they can see out across the field. Who knows? But I think it's just fascinating that over a 2-day period, 3 bucks lay down. I mean, they plop down in this thing. So it's kind of funny, though, that other people have seen the same thing every now and then.
Mm-hmm. I've never seen that. I've never got a picture of a buck laying in a scrape, but I'll tell you what, I've got both rope scrapes and natural scrapes. I've got a lot of pictures over the past couple weeks of some really nice bucks. I don't have, I'm out there trying to find a giant at all times, but I'll tell you what, I found a bunch of bucks in the past 2 weeks that if they can just live 1-2 more years, they have a chance to be absolutely giants. So
Yep.
Let's see what happens. We got a gun season and a whole lot more before next season that those bucks have to deal with.
Yep. So, all right. Well, that's about all we have for tonight. Next week, I will be in Illinois. So, Don and I will try to figure out how to do a podcast in Illinois. We'll send out a message if we're going to have friends and buddies over for some pizza and do a live one or not. A lot's going to depend on what the hunting is. But you local guys plan on possibly doing something Saturday or Sunday night. We'll see how it goes, but we'll be in the area and try to do something if time permits. Might have to wait. When's the time change? Do you remember off the top of your head?
It's next Sunday, the 6th.
Might have to wait till the following week, because it's still kind of hard to do the podcast when it's getting dark. We need to get dark an hour early, so we'll let everybody know. I'll pretty much be living in Illinois for the next 30 days, so my work is not too happy about that, but so be it.
Well, you'll be in my house. Hopefully you're part of that. You got a place to stay if you need it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for the support. Thanks for all the birthday wishes. Good luck as we get to the pre-rut. Look at those cameras last year and see what came through. Don't worry about what hour you need to be there, right?
That's right. God bless everyone. Have a great week.
Take care.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo, Via Farm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.